I always felt that it was going to be successful, and the success was having the right CEO at the right time, and so I knew Norm was the right guy to replace me.
I had been a high school counselor. I needed to earn a little bit more money, so I left the counseling profession and went into the mobile home and travel trailer business, working as vice president of a manufacturing concern and also operating 5 retail lots in western Washington and Oregon. And the woman that was hired to take my place as senior class counselor and her husband came to a Christmas dinner. And he and I got to visiting, and he says, well, I understand you're a good counselor when you were there. Well, I need a good counselor. We have Ronald Hall, and it's a halfway house for parolees and probationers and ex-cons and people that need help. And he said, we need a 1-night-a-week counselor for a couple of hours. I had been doing that for about 6 months, and we had some rental property, and I was out cutting the lawn in the dark and had an accident and chopped a couple of toes off and was in the hospital. And
he was in the hospital, so he was a captive audience.
Before anybody else in my family got there, why, Dick Hudson and Lloyd Snider from Pioneer came up to visit me, and how could you be so stupid?
I said, Norm, you've got all these degrees in social work, and I'm a long-time banker. Why am I running a social agency and you're in business? I mean, this doesn't make sense. We need to switch this up, and would you be interested in coming on as the executive director?
And they offered me the position of executive director of Pioneer, and I thought about it, and I had some other opportunities, but I took that one, and sort of all by happenstance and you know, just a happy accident.
We've discovered over time people who have had a severe alcohol problem or something like that, in a crisis they couldn't handle it, and they'd get sick or they'd just disappear. And so we were very happy when Norm came along, because he wouldn't, when we had a crisis, he'd stay there and handle it.
When I came to Pioneer, we had an alcohol rehabilitation program, and we were working on criminal rehabilitation. And so as part of my orientation, I went over to visited the penitentiary and the reformatory. And while I was over at Walla Walla, I was talking to one of the counselors there, and he said, you know, we have institutional work release here. We have men living outside the walls in this minimum custody, and they go out during the day and go to work, and then they come back at night and live here. I said, well, gee, isn't that a neat idea? He says, yeah, but you know, if we had the right situation, we could do it in the community. I mean, there aren't that many jobs, and most of those people aren't from Walla Walla and so on, but they have to have a place to stay and live. We don't have an institution in Seattle. And he said, you know, I got to thinking maybe one of your halfway houses could think about doing something like that. So we went back home and started talking about it, and Barb and I sold our home in the North End, and we bought a house next door to Ronald Hall where we had our offender program, and we made a deal, and they gave us 10 men straight out of prison, came and stayed with us, and it worked from the very beginning. They had to be in custody 24 hours a day, so whenever we went out to the theater or we went to the store, we had a carload of fellows along with us. And I never forget going to Woodland Park to the zoo, and Barbara and I were walking down the path towards the reptile house, and there were 6 guys fondling behind us. They didn't want to look like Mommy and Daddy, you know, they had their own little group. But they went with us, and Barbara saw a man pouring Coca-Cola on the head of an alligator in its eyes, and he was, you know, being a little bit unkind to the alligator, and the poor thing was throwing its head up and down, and she ran over there and punched him under the armpits and said, cut that out, being the good school teacher that she is. And this guy, he had 2 friends, and he turned around, he just glared at us, and you knew he wanted to do something. And we stood our ground and looked at him, and then he turned and walked away. He didn't realize we had 6 guys standing there behind us that were ready to settle the beef right there then and there if we had to, which we never did.
Norm is such a dynamic person that you gravitate to his philosophy very fast and very good, because Norm was a wonderful person.
After a few months, we got a little bit of more latitude into it so that they could go out with their family and friends. And we expanded very rapidly from the original group of 10 to over 100 work release beds. And after a period of time, I had just 3 people on our board with all these board members. There were just 3 of them were women.
As Norm will tell you, I'm the one that went to him and said, now look, we need to do something about women prisoners as well.
So finally, we talked it over and decided now was the time. So we converted our house into a halfway house for female work release people, and they moved in with us, and there's 6 women. And the women were a much more interesting group. The men were pretty self-reliant, get up and go to work, but the women had a lot of other problems. You know, there's 10 times as many men in prison as there are women. And so it means only the women that are most troubled and disturbed manage to make it to prison. And that means they need that much more help when they get out.
Well, you know, that was is a good program, but they got some of them that really weren't all that harmonious. They didn't get along good with the rest of the guys. So Barbara normally would take the bad ones, the ones that are difficult, over to their house and have them sleep and work out of there. Well, we were all astounded that they would do it, but it worked. He just was a wonderful, and Barbara, just a wonderful person.
Well, it was very, very interesting. We had one woman borrow the drapes from our formal dining room, and we had all kinds of interesting little things like that happen, but nothing too serious. Well, Annetta was one of the first 6 women to come out of Purdy in the first work release unit. And she was a strikingly beautiful woman, and young, and just looked like she had everything going for her, which she did, but she had the worst reputations around in the prison. But she came out, and she couldn't stand to be around men. And we'd be sitting in the living room, and I'd walk in to sit down, she'd get up and leave. And we'd be at the dinner table, and I'd come in, and she'd go out. And I noticed this, so I called her on it. She said, well, I've never known a man yet that I could trust. I've never known a man that ever did anything good for me. And so we just went together working on that. And we spent an awful lot of time just talking about that. But she's grown up and gone on, and certainly one of our most accomplished graduates. She deserves a tremendous amount of credit. She's helped hundreds of other people, really a person of compassion and concern with all the others who came after her.
There's something unique, almost mystical about Norm Chamberlain. He's just one of these brilliant men, but one of the most uncommonly warm and gracious and thoughtful men that I've ever met in my entire life, any place.